So here we have our first introduction to the Gimp program, the image manipulation program. So what we'll do in this first session is just go through all of the toolboxes, the layout, some basic tools, some basic imaging techniques, and this will form the basis of further tutorials. This initial introduction should lay down the fundamentals of how to use the software. Further tutorials will improve our ideas of how to use the software and also improve the techniques that we use as well. So we have our pull down menus that we would have in any other package. We have our toolbox on the left hand side, and we look at some of these tools in a short while. On the right hand side we have our layers dialog box along with our brushes. The layers have a number of different tabs associated with channels, paths, and the undo history, and along the bottom of our brushes we have patterns and we have gradients, but again we'll look at them in different tutorials. So as I go through the first couple of tools, rectangular select, elliptical select, free selection, fuzzy selection, they're going to be used fairly quickly. Our move option, resizing, adding text, the paint bucket tool, gradient tool, pencil, brush, airbrush, erase, our color picker, and then our properties dialog box. This area of the toolbox will change depending on whichever tool that we use. So depending on what options are available in each tool, we'll get an option to pick from down here. At this stage I don't have an image open, so I don't have anything open to work with, so I'll start with a new image. When I open up the new dialog box, there are a couple of options that are quite important. The first one being the template. So Gimp comes with a number of preset options for images. These ones here, the first 4 images are based on a pixel size. So these are 640 pixels by 480 pixels, which in display terms is reasonable, but in print terms is tiny. Further down though we get page sizes. So these page sizes here refer to a standard printable sheet, and it also relates to the resolution or the quality of the sheet itself, so 300 pixels per inch. So if we were putting together posters for design competitions or for projects, this would be a quite useful option, the A3 size with print quality, high print quality resolution. For this example I'm just going to choose a 640 by 480. So you can see that we could, if we didn't want to use a template, we could literally fill in the information here, and we could choose what units we're going to use. The advanced options allow us to define the resolution, which again we'll come to in further tutorials and also in class. Is a very important step, and if we make a mistake at this stage, then it could be critical, and we could end up having to redo a lot of work if we don't pick these options correctly. For this introductory tutorial though, 640 by 480 is fine. I click OK and it opens up a blank image for me, which I'm just going to zoom back. So now that we've started a single image, we now notice over on the right hand side that we have a single layer. The default layer is called the background layer. I can draw on this layer, but typically I would set or I would add new layers on top of the background layer, and I would leave the background layer empty. So if I want to create a new layer, well, then I can click on the new dialog box here. So it asks for a layer. It also asks for a layer name. At this particular stage I'm not really worried about the layer name. What type of information is filled into the new layer? Now normally the default option of transparency would be the best option to use, so I'm going to leave that option there and I'm going to click OK, and we now have a new layer added to our image. Okay. So if I was to rename that, as opposed to calling it new layer, I'll call it layer 1. Now if I was to so now I have layer 1. Layers work in the same idea as in AutoCAD, and they sit on top of each other. This is a difference, though. They are stacked on top of each other. So the layer order, okay, defines the precedence about which we can see information based on a layer, and we'll see the idea of precedence now in a few minutes. So if I was to go to a simple brush tool, okay, I click on the brush tool, it now asks a number of options. One of them here is opacity. I'll move the opacity up to 100%. Over on the right hand side I can pick from brushes that are available. Now in this particular case I have loaded up a lot of custom brushes from various sources, so I'll try to pick just a default brush, maybe this fella here, and if I try and draw with that brush, you can see now it's like using Microsoft Paint. Okay, it's not very defined. If I go to the color picker, I can choose a color and I can draw additional information. Note the destructive nature of these pixels. I have now overwritten the previous black pixels in this area, and this area. So adding information via the paintbrush tool is destructive on the layer. Okay, if I was to undo that selection there, okay, if I was to add a new layer, okay, if I was to add a second layer on top of what we have already, layer 2, and click OK. Okay, you now see that I have 2 layers. If I was to add information to this layer, if I was to change the size of the brush, for example, okay, I now have added information, but because the information has been placed on a different layer, it's not destructive to the information that was on layer 1. So I can hide the layer, okay, I can reorder, I can move the layer back down again, and in this case layer 1 becomes the higher precedence, so the information held on layer 1 appears above layer 2. So when we get to design more complicated images and we need to manage the information more accurately, then the position of the layers in the layer stack become very important. If I have a look at some selection tools, if I, let's say, turn off this layer so it doesn't get in the way, that layer is now hidden, the information still exists. Also, if I do not move the layer selection off of this layer, then anything that I do on this layer will not be visible. So I need to make sure that the layer here is selected. Now that I have this layer 1 selected and I'm dealing with the black colored pixels, I could take a selection. This would simply require me to drag an area. Once I've dragged this area, Gimp will then allow me to resize, okay, or I can drag or I can reposition where the selection is being taken from, so I can make it bigger, I can make it smaller. Once I have defined a selection, as well as helping me copy or paste the information, it also isolates just this selected area so that I can only add or redefine elements within this selection. So if I came to the paintbrush tool again, and if I reset the color back to black, even though this selection is active and I do have access, you will see that even though I drag the cursor backwards and forwards across an area, it will only allow me to add pixels within the defined selection. This also allows me to delete only within that selection. So if I was to delete the information, clear it, it will only clear from that selection and it will leave everything else alone. If I want to deselect an area, I can select none, note the shortcut, and I will emphasize these shortcuts throughout the classes. Okay, so now only the information from layer 1 has been edited. If I turn on layer 2, you can see that that information still exists. If I take a selection from a particular layer and I select it, then I could use a move tool, and the move tool will allow me to move, okay, but you can see that it does not move just the selection, it moves the whole layer. Okay, so you can see there. Okay, so if I was to undo that, if I want to delete a layer, I can click on the layer itself and I can delete it. And that information is now gone from the image, it's not hidden anymore, it is now deleted. If I was to take the bucket tool, okay, if I add a new layer just so that I don't overwrite the wrong information, if I add a new layer and if I go to the bucket tool and if I pick a particular color, the bucket tool will add to the whole layer. That is because I have nothing selected, so it's essentially wiped the whole layer with a certain color. If I had a selection active, then it would only allow me to bucket fill that particular selection. Deselect that information. If I was to use the gradient tool, okay, the gradient tool gives me the option to transition between two colors. So if I draw a gradient, you can see that it creates a gradient. In this case here, it was one of the presets. Okay, so you can see that it transitions from one color to another, to another, to another. You can see though that it's also over, or it's hidden some of the information from the previous selection, and that's because in this case here the opacity has been set to 90%. Therefore it's slightly transparent, only very subtly, and that's why I see the information here hidden behind the previous layer. Again, the idea of layer preference or layer precedence. If I move that layer down in the stack, this layer 2 becomes more visible, takes higher precedence, therefore all of its contents are shown. If I delete these layers just to reset everything. Okay. If I come to the text tool, okay, text tool will allow me to add text, as you would see in a normal text editing package. Okay. And then you can see that it creates a new layer. And this new layer is specific to that text. Any of the information that I have on that layer I could change. For example, I could change the font that was being used. Okay. If I then go to move that information, I can move the information based on the whole layer. So you can see that I can drag around the text. Note that the layer, the text that the layer was placed on was defined by the color that was currently active based on when I placed the text itself. Okay, so, but all of this information can be changed. If I wish to go in and change some of the text, that's not really an issue. So for the moment they are the standard tools that I will use: some selection, some text, some paintbrushing, some paint bucket, the gradient. I also have the erase tool. Now the erase tool will will delete pixels as per the paintbrush tool. So it works basically as the opposite to the paintbrush tool. It uses the secondary color or the background color that's applied. So if I was to change the background color to white, then it would erase essentially, or does erase simple text. Note that when I erased off the text layer, it turned the text into pixels rather than being an actual text element of letters. It turned it into a pixel based layer. So just be careful about messing around with text based information, because now that I've changed it to pixels, I've no way of rewriting the text itself. Basically covers some very simple introductions into the Gimp software program.